The idea of mind or consciousness being present everywhere isn't exactly new. There's several religions where if you squint hard enough, they seem to resemble panpsychism. For example, animism, where pretty much everything in nature, like plants, animals, mountains, and rivers, all have a conscious-like spirit and can have human-like or greater levels of intellect. There's a lot of different flavors of panpsychism, some of which I'm going to explain with ice cream. Pan-experientialism. This is the vanilla ice cream, or the base of pretty much every other flavor, where everything is conscious or has some level of conscious experience. When people hear this, they might project human levels of consciousness onto things, like saying a rock can be happy or sad, or that it has cognition and has the ability to think. But doing so is projecting a complex human emotion onto it. What we're talking about is something much more basic, only saying that there is something it is like to be, or a sense of awareness associated with them, and not towards objects like rocks, but instead the fundamental particles rocks and humans are made from. This isn't to say a rock doesn't have the potential to feel happiness. Pan-protopsychism is where everything has ingredients which, if combined in a certain way, can create consciousness. This takes a much more simplistic form of ice cream, so much so that it's before the ice cream was even made, where you're only left with the ingredients for ice cream. So similar to ice cream ingredients, if your rock were arranged in a certain way, maybe it would experience happiness, which at first sounds like the normal science explanation of consciousness, that our brain is simply matter arranged in a way that gives rise to consciousness. But pan-protopsychism is different in the sense that there's proto-conscious properties inside of things, which can then combine into a way that produce full-on consciousness. Pan-qualityism is a variation of this, under which everything has unexperienced qualities, and our consciousness are filled with experienced qualities. This is going even beyond our concept of ice cream ingredients and going straight to cow tits. In basic forms, matter remains unexperienced, but matter becomes experienced when it plays a certain causal role in a cognitive system. For example, in order to acquire ice cream, you've got to milk the udders. Everything has a pair of them, and the milk is in there, but you got to get it out. To get the milk to come out, there's a certain thing you've got to do to them. Now let me reiterate. Matter becomes experienced when it plays a certain causal role in a cognitive system. Constitutive panpsychism is where everything has a basic version of consciousness. These basic bits of consciousness can form a complex version. So our macro-level consciousness is constituted or made up of a lot of micro-level consciousness. This gives rise to the question, how do many tiny bits of consciousness come together and form a larger one? That is something we will get into later. Nonconstitutive panpsychism takes human and animal consciousness to be fundamental. So, unlike constitutive panpsychism, it's skipping the whole step of small consciousness forming a complex consciousness and says human-like consciousness is grounded right at the micro level. This view typically relies on some form of emergence, where human consciousness arises from some causal interactions between the micro-level subjects. One such form is fusionism. Instead of micro-level subjects forming a human mind similar to bricks composing a house, instead, they fuse together, ceasing to exist in the process, creating one single unified brick. Cosmopsychism. For this one, instead of our consciousness being constituted by the very small, it's grounded in the very large, the cosmos itself. Picture this. You have a table. Now, why is the table the way it is? A common view are that facts about big things are grounded in facts about small things. There's a bottom-up approach to the table, where the table is grounded in facts about the atoms making it up, being related in certain ways with each other, and so on and so forth. But if you think about it, it could go the other way as well. The atoms in the table exist and are the way they are because the table exists and is the way it is. In other words, an atom in the table exists and is the way it is because the atoms surrounding it, and those atoms exist and are the way they are because the atoms surrounding them, and so on and so forth until the table is grounded in facts about the cosmos as a whole. This idea is called priority monism, and if we combine it with panpsychism, we get cosmopsychism, where consciousness is grounded in facts of the cosmic level. and so the cosmopsychist holds that the universe has some form of experience. It's a basic version though, possibly because at the cosmic scale, it's just too messy to form any cognitive agent. So let's go over some arguments to ground ourselves, because we're sounding a bit wacky. A conscious cosmos? Have you been taking acid by any chance? So let's not do that without a good reason. Oh look, a good reason. We look at human consciousness and we definitely have that, right? But what about animals like dolphins and elephants? Animals with very high levels of self-awareness and intelligence. To say they don't have any bit of consciousness at all is hard to argue for. So this brings up the point. If elephants have a lower level of consciousness than humans, do mice have an even lower level than elephants? We can follow this rationale down and down, from mice to bacteria to an atom to an electron. We could even take a step away from something as debatable as animals and electrons and exclusively look at humans. Humans create consciousness all the time. From conception to adulthood, consciousness emerged somewhere, but we don't know where. It's vague the entire way, until you reach fundamental particles, at which point you've reached the floor. There either is or there isn't. While on the subject of arguments, we should probably skim Nagel's argument, which consists of 4 premises. Living organisms are simply matter with nothing special arranged in a certain way. Mind is a real experience of living organisms. From the parts of the system, there is no magic, so you should be able to understand how the parts are able to form something like a mind. We don't understand how mind is derived from physical properties alone. Following either of these 2 rationales, we can see how it would make sense that everything has a little bit of consciousness. This idea has been around for quite a long time. The Greeks even had an expression for it. Out of nothing comes nothing. How are you supposed to get something non-physical with only physical ingredients? That is to say, mind from mindless. Maybe mind didn't emerge entirely from our brain anatomy, but instead came from something more fundamental. Russellian panpsychism. There's things physical science can't tell us. For example, everything we know about an electron can be summed up with how it interacts with its environment, the extrinsic or dispositional nature of matter. It doesn't tell us anything about the intrinsic nature of it. We see everything not so much as beings, but as doings. This can be illustrated with consciousness itself. Why is consciousness such a hard nut to crack? Well, it's kind of unobservable. If you show a brain the color red, a neurologist can scan the brain and see how the brain reacts and processes that stimuli. We can observe the brain's disposition towards it. You could potentially do this to the point where you know every single bit of what the brain is doing, but still not understand what it's actually like for the brain to subjectively experience red. All observations are of that nature. For an electron, you're only observing its extrinsic nature. So this prompts the question, what is an electron's intrinsic nature? Could it actually have a sense of being? Because of the intrinsic nature of consciousness, this means you can't observe it. So in a sense, all we're left with is our own speculation, or to reason through our own intrinsic experience. Hey friend, this next part is going to involve emergence. So let's go on a learning journey together and learn about emergence. There's 2 kinds of emergence, intelligible and non-intelligible. Both are equally hated in the scientific community. No, I'm just kidding, only one of them are. Wow, it's warm out today, isn't it? Hey, that reminds me, temperature is a form of intelligible emergence. If you have a single particle, that particle itself doesn't have a temperature. So where does it come from? Well, if you add in more particles, what creates temperature is how much a particle is moving relative to other particles. Basically, how quickly the particles are vibrating. We can understand this perfectly well, so temperature is an intelligible type of emergence. Oh look, a magician. Perfect timing. We can use this to contrast unintelligible emergence, because it's more in line with the word abracadabra. It's magic. It's basically just another word for magic. This is actually what scientists hate, because when you say something like consciousness is emergent, or seemingly comes from nothing, it has no explanation power, and it's equivalent to calling it a miracle. So, avoiding explanations that rely on radical emergence is greatly preferred. Oh wow, I guess we're at the end of our learning journey. I guess it's time to say goodbye now. Well, goodbye everybody. It's now time to talk about arguments against panpsychism. The combination problem. There's two of them actually. The first being, if you're starting with basic consciousness, like in the case of constitutive panpsychism, then how does it combine in a way that forms a complex version? If everything has a sense of being, you've got being plus being, which just equals being. How would you end up with being plus or being greater than being? This is emergence, my friend, but arguably going from a simple form of mind to a complex form of mind is still easier than going from absolutely no mind to having a mind. So panpsychism is still attractive for that reason. And then of course there's the subject summing problem. How do many tiny conscious experiences that exclude all other conscious experience come together and form a single conscious experience? At first this may sound similar to combining two beings into being plus or something, but while that one was about how to form a more complex being, this is simply how to combine them at all. For example, if you have two people, where one person is experiencing red and no blue, and the other person is experiencing blue and definitely no red, then how would those experiences combine together? You can't be experiencing red and not red at the same time, so something doesn't add up and it seems to contradict itself. Anyway guys, that's about all I've got time for this time. Bye.